Hey, it's Bill Simmons from the Bill Simmons Podcast here to tell you about Michelob Ultra Courtside. It's getting fans closer to the NBA with a chance to win prizes like courtside seats, a trip to All-Star Weekend, and much more. Check it out at MichelobUltra.com/courtside. Michelob Ultra Superior Access, Courtside 24-25 sweepstakes, no purchase necessary. Open to U.S. residents 21 and up. Begins on October 1st, 2024, ends July 1st, 2025. Multiple entry periods. Visit MichelobUltra.com/courtside for free entry deadlines, and official rules. Message and data rates may apply. Void where prohibited.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit Shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
Hello and welcome to the Oregonian Sports Podcast. I am Bill Oram, joined as always by Brenna Greene from Coin 6. Brenna, let me start by asking you how you are doing today.
I'm good. Just enjoying the downtime before our lives get crazy.
It was interesting. I did have the realization on Saturday that it was my first Saturday not covering a college football game since the end of August.
Wow.
So I was sitting there with my kids realizing that I was not going to be leaving at some point, and I think they came to that realization. It was just it was a weird day.
You know, speaking of weird things, like it's weird for me because I was looking at the schedule for the Rose Bowl and realized that I have to take Friday and Saturday off that week because we leave on Sunday. And I'm like, that's weird.
Yeah, two of the busiest days for somebody in sports media, especially in the fall.
And I mean the 2 days that I'm normally anchoring, that's normally my outside of high school football season, I normally anchor Fridays and Saturdays. So I had to walk in this Saturday and be like, just so you know, I kind of like have to take those days off. So we got to figure out something else. Because I could have totally seen it being a situation where all of a sudden we get to the day of the Rose Bowl and I'm like, oh yeah, I can't work this weekend. So that's going to be weird. It's actually going to end up being a 4-day break for me no matter what. So that's bizarre. But you know.
Yeah, when was the last one of those?
Yeah, because I normally take Sunday, Monday off the next week. So I'm going to have 4 days, but trust me, don't worry. Before that, I'm going to be working straight from the 24th. From the 25th through the 2nd. So we're cruising along, baby. There you go. And that's what everyone listens to this podcast for my work schedule. So,
Brenna, there's actually kind of a sneaky amount of stuff to get to this week, and we didn't record last week, so we have not recapped the Big Ten championship game between Oregon and Penn State. Although I think people are probably pretty well caught up on that at this point. But I actually have something on my mind this morning.
Oh, please!
And this is something that I have been really stewing about for going on 24 hours now, and college football is in disarray across the board, whether it's the transfer portal. Penn State's backup quarterback entered the transfer portal. Penn State might win the national championship. And all of a sudden their backup quarterback, because of the way the schedule falls and the way this system is engineered, is in the transfer portal, will not be participating in the college football playoff. Ridiculous. So there's all of that. There's all these issues around the sport. But what I want to focus on today is bringing sanity and consistency to postseason awards in college football.
Oh, gosh.
Okay? Here's what I'm talking about. Over the weekend, the Heisman Trophy was awarded, the most prestigious award in all the land, honoring the best player in college football. It went to Travis Hunter from Colorado. Fine. That's fine. Ashton Jenney from Boise State probably would have had my vote. He gets second place. Dillon Gabriel from Oregon.
Did you vote for him for AP Player of the Year?
I did.
I did too.
So Dillon Gabriel finishes third in the Heisman voting, and Cam Ward from Florida State. Nope, I'm sorry, from Miami. I was right the first time. Formerly of Washington State, finishes fourth. Mm-hmm. All good, no complaints. Then yesterday, the AP All-American teams come out, and I'm a voter in the AP All-American teams, as you are. AP Top 25. We participate in all this stuff. And Dillon Gabriel is the third team All-American quarterback, behind Cam Ward, the first team All-American quarterback, and behind Shedeur Sanders from Colorado at number 2. And I'm open to a conversation that these awards represent different things. But if Dillon Gabriel is as judged by the Heisman Committee, and I realize these are different voting bodies, so you have different individuals and different standards that people are bringing to their own vote.
And way more people voting in Heisman, too.
Correct. But if Dillon Gabriel is the consensus best quarterback in the Heisman voting, then shouldn't he also be the first team All-American quarterback? Like, to me, that's just logic, like basic logic. And it kind of comes down to what you value. Because if you look at the statistics that define a quarterback, we're talking, passing yards, touchdown to interception ratio, completion percentage. Dillon Gabriel was very, very, very good. Don't misunderstand me here. But he was not the best in the country. In terms of total yards, he was 8th. His average distance was less than Jackson Dart from Mississippi. His touchdown interception ratio was 28-6. That's Shedeur Sanders was 35-8. How do you judge those two things? Cam Ward 36-7. Mm-hmm. So Dillon Gabriel, statistically not the best quarterback in the country. Okay. Now, there's a whole host of reasons why those numbers aren't as good that I'm happy to dive into in just a second. But so maybe the argument is that the Heisman Trophy puts a greater emphasis on winning. Are you a winning player? Okay, I buy that. You can convince me that the Heisman puts a greater emphasis on that, but the All-American is more about like individual performance and individual statistics. Except for we gave the Heisman Trophy to a guy who plays on a team that finished 4th in the Big 12 and is not in the college football playoff. So you can't say you're putting an emphasis on winning when you have 2 players who are in the college football playoff who are finalists, and one of whom has an extremely strong case to win the award in Ashton Genty, and took a team from the group of 5 to a first round bye in the CFP, and not even a first round bye, like the 3 seed. So I just want it to make sense. And it doesn't make sense to me because Dillon Gabriel, statistically, not the best player in the country. Dillon Gabriel, not the best quarterback in the country, statistically. And the reasons for that are his team was not in a lot of close fourth quarter games. If you watched Miami at the end of throughout the year, I mean, they were always coming back from double digits. They were always needing to score 50 points just to hold off mediocre teams that were scoring 35, 40 points against that really bad Miami defense. So if Dillon Gabriel was at Miami with that defense, he would have put up, similar numbers. Colorado was kind of in a similar boat. So that leads to inflated numbers. And I'm not saying that minimizes the success that those players had. I mean, Cam Ward still had to complete those throws. He still had to make those plays. I mean, Cam Ward had a great year. Shedeur Sanders is a superstar. But Dillon Gabriel's numbers, I don't think, are reflective of his impact, which I think the Heisman Trophy voting body understood. And for some reason, the AP All-American voting body did not give him credit for. So I just want it to make sense and to be consistent.
Yeah. Well, and then I also want to add the fact that Shedeur Sanders won the Golden Arm Award. So, normally with this quarterback stuff, there is consistency. It's pretty consistent. And this year it is obviously not. I mean, to the point where, I don't know, maybe I was just cruising along yesterday when Oregon put out the AP All-American graphic, but I thought until you told me this morning that Dillon was second team. I thought he was second team. I was like, wait, he's third team? I really don't understand Shedeur being second team, just from, like you said, the pure fact of winning. Dillon
his numbers are terrific. I mean, I want to be clear. I mean, he was third in the country in passing yards behind Kyle McCord from Syracuse and Cam Ward.
Yes.
He threw 35 touchdowns, which is, I believe that's second most behind Cam Ward. Yeah. So most touchdowns thrown, Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, Cade Klubnik, and then the kid from UNT, and Dillon Gabriel's down at 8th. It just, tied with Carson Beck. Sorry to hijack you there, but it's like he's not undeserving of recognition.
No,
I just and this is the go ahead. I'll let you. I've had the soapbox for a while. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, there is something to be said about playing the most important position on the number one team in the country that has not lost a game so far this season, and that is that I think puts you on second team that I never even questioned. I mean,
did you vote Cam Ward to first team quarterback?
I did.
Did you have a Heisman vote?
No, I don't.
If you had a Heisman vote, what would your order for those 4 have been?
It probably would have been, it would have been Ashton, Travis, Cam, Dillon for me.
Okay. Yeah. See, consistency. I appreciate consistency. The other thing, by the way, you mentioned the Golden Arm Award. The Davey O'Brien Award, which honors the top quarterback in the country, went to Cam Ward. So you basically have, and maybe the answer is very simple. Maybe you have 3 quarterbacks who are all so good that they all deserve it, and they're all kind of splitting the vote everywhere, and it's kind of breaking different ways. Because to your point, generally, like, by the end of the year, there's just a consensus like, oh, this was the player of the year in college football, or this was the best quarterback. I can appreciate that the Heisman went to sort of a non-traditional candidate, and that it wasn't a quarterback. It wasn't, necessarily from the best team. It was just the dude who impacted his team the most. And obviously, I mean, Travis Hunter did something ridiculous this year in terms of, and last year, but in terms of, the impact he has on 2 sides of the ball and like being among the best in the country at that, first team All-American at 3 positions. But like, I think he was second team as a receiver. I'd have to look, but I just find the lack of consistency to be very frustrating and very annoying. And by the way, when I did look at my All-American ballot, like, this is the test I applied. Like, I voted Dillon Gabriel the first team All-American quarterback, not because I am an Oregon honk, not because there are Oregon players who made the All-American team who I didn't put on my ballot at all. And but I do find, in my mind, it was like, okay, is he the best quarterback in the country? I think so. I think the Heisman Trophy, balloting reflects that. So how do I not put him first team? Even though the stats aren't there. Here's another thought I had in terms of voting and how they are different for those 2 bodies. For the Heisman, you're really only worried about what? 5 to 6 players, maybe, that you have to really deep dive on. It's not as intense as voting for an AP All-American first and second team. Because let me tell you, it is a lot of research to figure these things out. No question.
It is okay, just personal anecdote. I figured out my first and second team offense on the flight to Indy, came back, opened up my laptop, the document was empty. I almost cried. I was like, no. Like, yes, I can remember some things, but the amount of research that goes into something like that is super intense because you're trying to figure out, it's a very specific thing. Like, you have to figure out, okay, not only do I need to figure out my first and second team offensive line, but I gotta make sure that this guy has been playing guard all season and not tackle. Like, it's very, very specific.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that those sort of things make you research things a little bit farther out. Whereas with Heisman, you can conceivably sit down on that Sunday and make your vote. I'm not saying that people aren't thinking about it, but it's going to be fresher in your brain. And especially it's going to be fresher in your brain with Dillon Gabriel because he just played the night before. And
but that would be the argument. That would be the argument for him to have gotten more votes for a higher spot. Right?
On the Heisman or on the AP All-American team?
I'm saying the AP All-American team because that was due the Monday after the Big Ten championship game, 2 days after.
Yes, but I'm saying that
right?
maybe a lot of people voted in that AP All-American team or had their thoughts set for that AP All-American team prior to that game because of the amount of research that requires. Whereas the Heisman, you could conceivably sit down day of and have some things change for you because it's not as, rigorous of a process. I mean, you are not having to figure out a first and second team All-American kicker when you're voting for or punter when you're voting for the Heisman. So that's just my only thought in terms of how things could have been a little bit different, whereas Cam did not get that opportunity on Saturday to kind of make that last final push for anything.
Whereas I think it has, and I think that's a fair point about kind of the last memory that you leave voters with. But I think Cam's candidacy for the Heisman, like he fell out of kind of that out of the running really once Miami started losing games. I mean, they ended up losing 2 games down the stretch, and like that knocked them out. And just as if Dillon Gabriel had taken a loss somewhere along the way, I don't know if he's a Heisman finalist. He was a Heisman finalist in my mind on the back of a 13-0 season.
Yes.
And like you said, being the best player at the most important position on a 13-0 number 1 team. I just think that I'm asking for the impossible here, which is that basically people in different places and bodies can somehow intuit what others are thinking and what and come to some consensus. But I guess if I'm finding the silver lining here, it's that there was great quarterback play in many places around the country this year, and that the lack of consensus does give us something to chew on with these quarterbacks, and obviously gives us something to talk about and something to debate, but it does create, honors for, all these players, right? Like all these players, have something that they can kind of point to and stand on to reflect the great seasons that they've had. Cause they did all have great seasons. That's not in question.
Yeah. Or you could say that there wasn't someone who had an absolutely astounding season. They all have their flaws. I'm not saying that doesn't mean they didn't have good seasons, but I don't think that there was, at the end of the day, when you look at quarterback play around the country, it's pretty obvious that nobody had an absolutely blemish-free season, because if they did, guess what? They would have won the Heisman.
See, I disagree. I was just going to say, almost no matter what had happened this year, no matter how good these quarterbacks were, I don't know that any quarterback could have caught what Travis Hunter and Ashton Jenney had done. I mean, Travis Hunter, generational, two-way player, and then Ashton Jenney putting up some of the best numbers that we've seen in the past several decades, and he's going to set the record and all that. So, I mean, I do think that this was kind of like the Heisman was a 2-player race, I think, almost no matter what.
Okay.
But I mean, sure. I mean, a great quarterback season is always going to get more attention and more praise than almost anything else, because it is the most important position, and it's the most visible position. I mean, it's really hard for a wide receiver or cornerback to garner the kind of attention that Travis Hunter has, and it's only because he did both at such a high level. So, I can't really argue with the way the Heisman fell. I just find it to be, it just bothers me. Like in my little brain where I like things to be orderly and things to line up. And I like, if I'm eating hummus with a cracker, I make sure that there's like straight lines and edges in the hummus. I don't like the big, like mess swirl of just like dip and rip and dip. Like, no, like I like order. I like straight lines, and the postseason awards in college football have not given me straight lines.
Someone loves to smooth the ice cream, I can tell.
I do. And which, by the way, leads to so many more bites of ice cream as you're like, oh, nope, got to get that.
Got to get it perfect.
Yeah.
I respect it. Yeah, I was genuinely surprised when I saw the numbers for the Heisman and just how Dillon finished compared to Cam. It was not close for third. I mean,
yeah, I was just pulling it up. I mean,
over
it was
200 more votes than he had over 200 more votes than Cam did. So
yeah. So I mean, in terms of like the scoring system, he had like
almost 300 more.
Almost 300 more points, and then more votes at first, second, and third. So I don't know. I mean, we've probably exhausted this subject. Yeah. I think ultimately Dillon Gabriel deserved more recognition from the AP All-American team. There's still awards coming out. There's still more to unfold here. And, I'm going to sound like a coach or a player here, but, if Dillon Gabriel is left holding a trophy on January 20th, he's not going to care a whole lot about, the AP All-American teams. But in this moment, mid-December, 2 weeks to go until the Rose Bowl, I found that to be a bit of a mystifying development.
Nor does Dillon probably care like we care. So
totally. No, completely true. I mean, in his heart of hearts, like if you gave him truth serum and just said, does this make sense to you? But no, I mean, if he had a podcast, he probably wouldn't lead with
it. Not number one on his ballot of topics, huh?
Brenna, we have a seismic departure in Portland sports, and I am not talking about Lake Oswego's Jack Lane entering the transfer portal from Idaho, potentially following his coach Jason Eck potentially following Jason Eck, the coach at Idaho, to New Mexico. Already has an offer from the Lobos. Big move for Jason Eck, by the way. Just a week and a half ago, he was talking to me on the phone about like nearly knocking off Oregon, and all of a sudden he's on his way to Albuquerque. If they do not brand that Albuquerque, then what are they even doing? Albuquerque. Go Lobos. Jason Eck did a great job at Idaho, recruited the hell out of Portland and Oregon to build a really competitive team in the FCS.
A lot of kids from here went there.
The season ended with a loss to number 1 Montana State last weekend. So that's why things are moving now. Montana State is very, very good.
Wearing a Montana hat right now.
It's true. But you know what? Credit to the Bobcats. They've done it the right way. They have not kept going back to the well of success from 20 years ago and repeating past mistakes and building animosity with their fan base. Like the Bobcats have done it right. It does pain me to say, but as somebody who
words right there, fighting words. I said fighting words right there.
I hope Ken Haslam and the Montana Athletic Department are listening to me. I hope that they know that I am very frustrated with the direction of the football program as a very, 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 very proud alumnus of the university. That this feels like a problem that they created. With a complete lack of innovation, creativity, or backbone. The path of least resistance has led them here.
Didn't they make the national championship game last year?
Pure. I mean, fun team. Yes, they did. They also got smoked, and they had no business being in the national championship game. Very fun playoff run. It was a fluke. Look at the track record Bobby Hauck has had in the 5 or 6 years since he's been back. It's been an unmitigated disaster. But
we all thought when we started talking about Becky Sauerbrunn, we would talk about Bobby Hauck.
I hadn't said Becky Sauerbrunn yet. Thank you.
I know you hadn't, but now I'm ruining it.
For blowing my dramatic build to the payoff for people who've stuck with me through my Montana rant. But when I talk about the seismic departure, obviously I'm talking about Becky Sauerbrunn announcing her retirement from soccer, captain on the U.S. women's team, veteran of, I want to say, 3 World Cups and 2 Olympics. It's either that or inverted. I think it's 3 World Cups and 2 Olympics. Spent the last 5 years with the Portland Thorns. What jumps out to you about Becky hanging up her boots in this moment?
Man, just like very interesting time for the Portland Thorns. You know, you lose your leader on both offense and now defense. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they were the best players at their position on that team at this point. I think that, you know, definitely on offense, pretty obvious. It's Sophia. I'm not so sure about the defense. Sam Coffey. But, you know, two players who held a lot of weight around that team and had a huge voice in everything, are now departed. And so, you know, this is going to be a really interesting next year for the Thorns to see who kind of steps up and becomes steps up into more of a leadership role. I think Sam is pretty primed to do that. She's just kind of naturally like that. She's extremely eloquent. You can tell that girl is a daughter of a sports writer. Okay. Like when you interview her, it's like, oh, she's bringing it. I love it. So I think that she really can step into that role seamlessly. It'll be interesting to see, you know, offensively who kind of steps in that role. It's pretty, like, Sophia is somebody who can do it, I think, but you know, it's just different. It's going to be different. It's going to be a different type of leadership, I think, than what Sink was. And that doesn't necessarily mean that Sink was super like vocal. I just think it means that Sink just had this presence that I think is unreplaceable. So it's learning to operate a little bit differently. So, but losing those two together in the same year is pretty intense. So a very interesting moment, a very interesting fork in the road for the Thorns coming up. I'm not super surprised that Becky is retiring. I am a little bit surprised that it came about this way at this time. You know, most players announce it and then they at least get, you know, especially in soccer, it feels like there's at least some sort of farewell situation. Soccer is a very heavy farewell sport for whatever reason, especially with players that have, you know, traditionally made the national team. And that is just not going to be happening in this situation for Becky. So you would have expected it either a little bit, you know, either before the season ended or maybe right after the season. But a few months after the season, I was a little surprised by that. I was not expecting that on this fine Tuesday morning. So yeah, you know, big picture, very interesting time for the team. Smaller picture, narrowed down to Becky, very interesting timing. So,
what I find sort of interesting about it is just kind of zooming out a little, and about kind of the state of women's soccer, particularly in the U.S. But I mean, you can include Christine Sinclair in this as well. But in the last little over a year, you have seen Megan Rapinoe, Alex Morgan, and now Becky Sauerbrunn retire, and that is an entire era of leadership of the U.S. women's national team. Those are players who have been responsible for and certainly part of some of the most memorable runs that those teams have gone on, you know, World Cups, Olympics, and it just is represents a very significant changing of the guard. And we saw that in Paris. You know, that was a very different, you know, looking team. That wasn't, you know, Becky wasn't there. I mean, it was a very different looking, you know, women's national team that represented the U.S. in the Olympics. So I think, you know, just kind of the shifting or the changing face of the sport. Obviously, Sophia Smith is a huge part of that. Yep. Trinity Robin, like it's kind of notable how the sport has changed. And I think that I would also just say that you can't talk about Becky without talking about her role in the labor movement in U.S. soccer and fighting for equal pay. And she was the president of the union, I believe, when that was eventually agreed to. So when you talk about like Becky's legacy, you know, you could probably point to that before you even talk to any single moment on the field, because I mean, what that has done for, you know, obviously women's soccer, but the precedent it sets for women's sports across the board, an absolute game changer. And she's kind of the face of that movement. So, just a highly impactful, figure in the sport and in women's sports across the board. And, of course the Thorns are losing a very powerful and very respected voice. And that's a blow to, lose two of your, most senior leaders in a matter of months. I mean, they are a combined 80 years old. Becky's 39. Christine Sinclair is 41. Like, it was going to happen. They had to retire at some point.
Yeah.
And so, for the Thorns, I mean, it's probably, an opportunity to find that leadership from within, like you said, who does step up, who does fill that role, who does take on, whose leadership does this team start to embody going forward? And that can be fun to see too, as teams turn the page. So, sort of a happy trails moment to Becky, who has certainly earned, a great send off from the city of Portland and from the soccer community, and hopefully has great things awaiting her in her second chapter.
I did find it really interesting during this Olympic cycle how last year during the World Cup, there was a lot of questions on whether or not Becky was going to make that roster. And, obviously her injuries played a role in that not happening. This time around, her name just didn't really come up.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very obvious, this is not a teammate versus teammate situation, but, like Sam, Sam was another one during World Cup where it was like, is Sam going to make the team? Is Sam going to make the team? And she obviously didn't. And this time around, it was like, oh yeah, Sam's making the team. And Becky wasn't even really a thought. And I'm sure that, between Sink retiring and that, and just not really even having a moment, to not really being, I don't want to say she wasn't a thought to be on the national team, but it just wasn't, she wasn't in the conversation. And I'm sure for her, that was another moment of like, okay, maybe this is the world telling me that it is time for me to go do something else. I am kind of bummed, though, we don't get like a Becky Sauerbrunn press conference or anything, because I think she would have given some really good insight. I would have loved to have, peppered her with a few questions, and I think you would have as well.
I think you'll get an opportunity. The Thorns are going to have a celebration game for her at some point next season once the schedule is finalized. And I suspect that will be, it can't be what Christine Sinclair's farewell game was, which included, a goal, but it will, a chance to celebrate her. And I'm sure that she'll, sit in front of us and regale us with some stories. And I can also ask her about the lowest point of her career, like I did for Christine Sinclair. So keep that tradition alive in my
keep the good vibes rolling, baby.
By the way, Brenna, I have breaking news. This is Oregonian Sports Podcast breaking news.
Oh, please hit me.
Order is restored to the college football postseason awards universe. Ask me why.
Why?
Byline from James Crepia, the Oregonian Oregon Live, posted at 11:05 a.m. Tuesday, December 17th. Dillon Gabriel added first-team All-American honors to his list of accolades. He was named a first-team selection by the Football Writers Association of America.
Yeah.
So the Football Writers Association of America gets it, and the AP voting panel, which includes primarily football writers and broadcasters, somehow didn't. That's okay. Dillon Gabriel was also a second team selection of the Football Coaches Association and the Walter Camp Association. So it's kind of all over the place on that front. Sorry for the hard pivot, but I did want to get the breaking news in. Do we have a breaking news sound Producer, podcast editor Kelly Doyle will be working on that. If she can retroactively go in and add that sound, and then this explanation of me asking for it will make a little more sense. Maybe on the YouTube we'll get a chyron, breaking. Maybe
nailed it.
I really do think that there's room for us to jazz up the special effects on this podcast. You know what I mean?
I mean, why am I not surprised? Someone who loves a good pun wants that as well. I mean, that goes hand in hand.
I do think that it's just frills. I love frills. I'm a frilly guy.
Wow, this is a great podcast, Bill. I'm so glad we did this today.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So the Ducks functionally have a bye this weekend for the second straight weekend, because they earned it with their 13-0 run through the Big Ten, including dismantling Penn State in the Big Ten championship game. Maybe not quite, but pulled away and pretty decisively won. We have not talked about the whole path through the playoff thing here since the bracket has come out.
Yeah,
I think that has been a pretty well exhausted topic.
I agree with you.
But Ohio State and Tennessee play this weekend in Columbus, and I think that we all have sort of looked ahead with sort of the assumption that Ohio State and Oregon are on this collision course for a rematch. Do you believe that Ohio State will be the team that is there on January 1st in Pasadena with us? Or do you think Tennessee is going to deprive us of that matchup? And what do you think is better for the Ducks?
Oh, man. The thing that I keep coming back to with Ohio State is their offensive line and how beat up it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's a rough situation over there right now. I'm not saying that it's bad, but I mean, you lose your center, who was like the all everything on that team. And they also lost, I believe, 2 other offensive linemen throughout the year. So, that's something that I'm really going to be looking at this weekend to see how they do on that front.
Sure.
I'm really fascinated by that. I mean, I still do think Ohio State wins. I do. I think if you're Oregon, the saying goes, it's really hard to beat a team twice. And if you're Oregon, yes, it would be great to play Ohio State again. I don't think anybody would be denying that. But from then, man, I just want something different. But that could also mean, by the way, that they literally play an all SEC schedule. They just play a mini SEC schedule through the playoffs, which is kind of crazy. I didn't even think about that.
Any criticism that Dan Lanning has not beaten an SEC team would certainly be alleviated if the Ducks were able to run the table against, let's say, Tennessee, Texas, and Georgia.
Yeah. I mean, if I'm Oregon, I probably want to play Tennessee. Especially, Ohio State having a game against us already, having that tape, having that film. Probably want to play Tennessee. I'm not so sure it really matters all that much, but
they're gonna lose either way.
Yes, Oregon's going to be out of it no matter what.
Well, I don't know. That could have been what you were saying.
Yeah. I mean, that's not what I was saying. I mean, as you've already said, the schedule is rough. If they pull this off, it's one of the greatest no, I shouldn't say that. If they pull this off and they play who we think they are going to play, it has to be the greatest run in college football history.
I would submit that whoever wins this first 12-team playoff should wear that crown almost regardless of what the path is.
Yeah.
Because no college football team has ever had to play, 17 games 16 or 17 games
Mm-hmm.
to win a national championship. And winning is hard. Winning every week is hard. And there's a reason that like the SEC puts those ridiculous games in November where they play Mercer and, Kennesaw State and, Montana Western. Yeah. It's because winning is hard and playing juggernaut after juggernaut after juggernaut. I mean, it is conceivable consider the path of a team. Hold on, let me pull it up. Consider the path of a team that does not have a first round bye to winning the national championship. If it's Penn State, right? And everybody says Penn State has such a great path. Penn State has such a great path. Penn State will have to go from losing the Big Ten championship game against Oregon to playing SMU, which has been awesome all year, Boise State, which has the best running back in the country, Georgia, and then conceivably Oregon or Texas in the national championship game. Like that, even that being the easy path, right? SMU and Boise State and Georgia maybe is a little bit overrated, is insane. That's still an extremely difficult, 4-game path, or even just a 3-game path to get to the championship game in consecutive weeks. Like that is, it's just very, 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 very challenging. So I do think that like we have to acknowledge that whoever does win this thing, in year one has completed the most difficult college football season in the history of the sport. Just because there's never been anything like it.
It seems like the seeding situation will be changing. Yes.
So I answered this same question about who the Ducks should want to play on the. We do a weekly newsletter that folks should subscribe to, and my answer, Brenna, is maybe a bit of a zag, not Gonzaga, but a zag from the zig. I think it's Ohio State. I think Oregon's better than Ohio State. We've seen it. We've seen them beat them. I thought they were decidedly better than against the Buckeyes here. I mean, they could have lost, but I thought they were the better team. Yeah. And, it wasn't that close. And Tennessee scares me. Tennessee, statistically, Ohio State's defense is better, but Tennessee is right there. Tennessee's offense is better than Ohio State. Tennessee's quarterback is better than Ohio State's. I think Tennessee's more physical than Ohio State. And I just think there is something to be said for the devil you know. Oregon has spent this entire year in some way, shape, or form looking ahead to a game against Ohio State, anticipating a game against Ohio State, thinking of how to beat Ohio State for once and again, and now again. Because at the start of the year, all eyes were on week 6 and Ohio State coming to Eugene. Mm-hmm. Like that game did not sneak up on anybody. And then after Oregon won that game, everybody was looking ahead to the rematch in the Big Ten championship game. Like that was it. Like that was where this season in the Big Ten was going. And so you don't think that was in the back of Dan Lanning's mind or in the back of Tosh Lupoi or Will Stein's mind? Like, what did we do last time and what can we do better this time? And how can we catch them off guard? How can we surprise them? Because they think they know us now because they played us, but how can we actually fool them? Of course they were thinking about that. I'm not saying they were like spending hours and hours on this, but this is just human nature. Yeah. And then the rug gets pulled out from under that matchup. Michigan, upends Ohio State, and all of a sudden it's Penn State. That game could have been a little bit of a trap game for Oregon. They delivered, took care of it. I mean, it's hard to call playing the number 3 team in the country a trap game, but like it wasn't the opponent you necessarily anticipated. You take care of business. Now everybody's looking ahead to an Ohio State matchup again. And it just seems to me that you don't have the goods on Tennessee in the way you have the goods on Ohio State. Mm-hmm. And I think if I'm Oregon, I'm more scared, and Oregon shouldn't be scared of anybody. They're the number 1 team in the country, but I am more fearful of the challenges that Tennessee presents and needing to learn their personnel, learn the way they think, as opposed to Ohio State. And listen, I mean, this is the nature of the playoff. I mean, you don't know who's going to be there in the second round in the Cotton Bowl. It's like you think it's Texas, presumably, But hell, it could be Arizona State. Arizona State has been extremely good. Arizona State might have the best player on the field in that game, in Cam Skattebo. So, that is not something to discount. But I just think that, we know Oregon can beat Ohio State. We know Oregon has shown that it is better than Ohio State. Tennessee, Tennessee has been mighty impressive, with the exception of, a couple of weeks when it kind of face planted. So I'm a little more worried about Tennessee myself.
So yeah, I see your point of, hey, you already have a lot of intel on this other team. So you already have you already have a base level knowledge, whereas the other team, that's not the case. I mean, I'm sure that they are studying both programs to some effect this week.
It's not like they're going to be like, well, let's see who wins on Saturday and we'll start scouting.
Yeah.
That work is underway on both teams for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, I guess for me, just from a fan perspective, well, I mean, I guess from a fan perspective, it goes two ways, but first of all, I would like to see another rematch with Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be fun. I think it would be fun to have a traditional Pac-12 versus Big Ten Rose Bowl.
Sure.
With all the chaos of the last year. Here we are. And I think that also, potentially playing an all SEC schedule to the college football national championship game is I'd like a little bit of diversity in that as well, but that's just from a fan perspective.
I understand that, and I agree. I just think that, like, maybe this is wishful thinking. I think there's going to be chaos.
Yeah.
I think that, everybody's like, oh, Penn State, like easy path. Penn State could lose to SMU. SMU's good. Like nobody's giving SMU a chance. I understand it's going to be like negative 11 degrees in State College on that game's Friday, right? On Friday night. Like that is a huge advantage to Penn State. But like, no, I don't know. I just don't think that I don't think this thing is going to be chalk at all. Mm-hmm. And that makes, Oregon's path all the more treacherous, is like, I think there's going to be chaos, and, it's teams that you haven't, spent a lot of time thinking about, that you're kind of learning about on the fly. And I think there is going to be a real accumulation to this system. I mean, needing to beat 3 top 10 teams in consecutive weeks. I mean, whoever does it, I'm coming full circle now, but I mean, that's a hell of a feat. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I just don't think it's going to go chalk.
I mean, that could totally happen. I mean, but then you also have to look at the FCS playoffs right now. What's that looking like?
Yeah.
Chalk?
Well, that's true. That's true.
And that kind of tends to happen at the FCS level. Not all the time, as we've already talked about, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the top teams in the FCS are just so much better than everyone else. Yeah. I mean, North Dakota State and South Dakota State, Montana State, the funding, recruiting facilities, there's such a difference between what they have available and what is available at Fordham, but
I respect the random FCS poll.
Montana beat Fordham last year on the way to the FCS championship. So that was top of mind. Or no, we beat Furman. Never mind. Different FCS school. A different FU.
Well, I think the number one takeaway from our podcast today is that we are an anti-Bobby Howe podcast. That's the number one thing our listeners should take away from this.
That is a key takeaway, and I look forward to leading the search for Montana's next football coach when that time comes. Brenna, there's a lot more going on in the world. Blazers are continuing on this slow trudge through another losing season. Trade deadline is getting closer by the day. I think we can start talking about that soon.
Yes.
A quick note on that. The Athletic did put out a list on its 30 most tradable players today. I thought it was really interesting from the great Sam Vecini. There are 4 Blazers on the list. Robert Williams, who I've obviously advocated strongly for needing to be traded, comes in at number 9. And then after that, Anthony Simons, DeAndre Ayton, and Jeremy Grant all hit the list. But the takeaway is that all of those guys are going to be extremely difficult to trade, which we knew. And we understand that with the new CBA and the new salary cap restrictions, that those, $20+ million contracts are going to be harder to slide in for teams. Most teams that would trade for those players are already pretty good, and to be good, you're probably already expensive. So we can unpack all this a lot more going forward, but that's something to monitor. Transfer portal is open, been light movement for the Ducks, nothing major to report. A couple defensive players coming in who will certainly play next year. The Beavers lost a player to Michigan State again, so that's going to be a fun annual tradition as long as Jonathan Smith is there and the guys he brought to Corvallis are still hanging around. But a lot of dust to settle on that front, and we'll get back to it next week, but we will also start ramping up our view of the Rose Bowl.
Yes.
Because next week, Brenna, the Ducks are going to have a known opponent.
Yes.
And it will also be, the week of Christmas. We're going to come up with a fun Christmas game for the podcast, where we have to maybe we'll open presents that are actually topics to discuss.
Okay. All right. Okay.
I just came up with that right now.
We can workshop this a little bit.
Okay.
I like the path you're going down.
We'll take it off air. Okay. Yeah. Thank you to those who continue to listen in spite of everything and support our work at the Oregonian. Subscriptions are always appreciated. Reading is the best thing you can do for the Oregonian and just for yourself. And watching Brenna on Coin 6. She is a busy gal, as you know, so please continue to give her your support and your follows on Blue Sky. By the way, we're both on Blue Sky now. Yeah, Brenna, are you still in? Are you straddling, or have you made the move fully?
I'm straddling. I would actually say I'm probably more Twitter right now. I've got to figure it out. Okay, one of the big things about Blue Sky for me right now is that they've got to up their video capabilities over there. That's my big gripe about Blue Sky. It's impossible to upload video to that website right now that's longer than a minute. So
that's true. That is a legitimate broadcast journalist complaint. Yeah. There is somebody doing yard work outside my window, and I feel like it is probably not hurting the listenability of this podcast. Okay, well, maybe that's just my excuse to get out of here. Thank you for listening and supporting our work. Please tell your friends to listen to the Oregonian Sports Podcast. It's only going to get better and better as we get closer to the Rose Bowl and the college football playoff. There's also going to be additional episodes of Ducks Confidential, some new hosts cycling through there as well. I'll be hosting a couple episodes of Ducks Confidential. It won't just be James Crepia and Ryan Clark. You're going to get some Joe Freeman, some Bill Oram, and maybe some surprises along the way too. So thank you for listening, and stay tuned to that Oregonian Sports feed wherever you get your podcasts.